have just heard the grunts of a mountain gorilla, the subject of Part 2 of Gorillas in Our Midst, a 3-part miniseries from Our Wild World. Welcome to Our Wild World. I'm your host, Dr. John David Alferts. I've been an educator for over 38 years, serving as an adjunct professor, superintendent, principal, and teacher. Whenever we can, my wife Christina, also an educator, and I are trekking into the wild to see our 2-legged, 4-legged, and winged friends in the animal kingdom. Together we've been entertained by a mountain gorilla in the impenetrable forest as she played on the stomach of her napping silverback dad. We've been startled by the thunderous roaring of 2 aggressive hippos in the Okavango Delta as they fought behind our tents, shaking the ground as they did so. We've had a curious African lion lie down outside our tent as she played with our tent bag. While hiking in the bush at Lake Tanganyika, I've come within 75 yards of an elephant family drinking from a stream. At Meru National Park in Kenya, Christina and I came eye to eye with a black mamba who lifted herself up just 12 feet from us, warning us that she was about to strike. After all my time in the bush, I have a story or two to tell. So it makes sense that I'm combining my passion for teaching with my passion for wildlife to launch Our Wild World, introducing listeners to, as the Lakota would say, Bitakuye Oyasin, or all our relations in the animal world. Each episode is meticulously researched and includes my first-hand observations from the bush. I think you'll find it's a podcast like no other. As you listen, be sure to check out our sister social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, X, and Blue Sky for photos and videos that Christina and I have taken of the wildlife featured in each podcast episode. And now, let's begin. In this special 3-part gorilla series from Our Wild World, we will explore the behavior of lowland and mountain gorillas. In this episode, you'll hear about Dian Fossey's groundbreaking research of mountain gorillas, her battles to save them, and we will explore her untimely, still unsolved death. I'll share with viewers my conversation with Fossey's lover, National Geographic photographer Bob Campbell, and my correspondence with her biographer, famed Canadian conservationist Farley Mowat, as well as American diplomats stationed in Kigali, Rwanda in the 1990s, as to their theories as to who murdered Dian Fossey. This episode will also feature Koko, the most famous gorilla of all, who mastered American Sign Language. I've been fortunate to track gorillas 3 times in my life. The lowland gorillas at Kahuzi-Biega National Park in the Congo, which was then Zaire. The mountain gorillas Dian Fossey studied at Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda, and in Uganda's impenetrable forest. In Part 1 of this 3-part series, I described my trek to see the lowland gorillas at Kahuzi-Biega National Park, and my detention by Rwandan soldiers who accused me of being a Ugandan rebel. If you haven't listened to that episode, you'll want to do so. Part 3 will feature the treks my wife and I have made to see the mountain gorillas of Rwanda's Volcanoes National Park and Uganda's impenetrable forest. Now let's begin. Mountain gorillas are an endemic species, meaning they are only found in a specific geographic area, this being the Virunga Mountains, bordering Rwanda, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, called Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda, and the impenetrable forest in Uganda. No mountain gorillas have ever survived in captivity. Attempts in the 1960s and the 1970s to capture captive breeding populations of mountain gorillas for zoos all ended in failure, and thankfully have not been replicated. It is thought that the specialized dietary needs of mountain gorillas, their susceptibility to disease, and the high stress they experience when captured all make their survival in captivity highly unlikely. Mountain gorillas live up to their name and are found only in forests high in the mountains with elevations of 8,000 to 13,000 feet. In order to survive in habitats where temperatures frequently drop below freezing, mountain gorillas have grown much thicker fur than the other great apes. As humans have encroached upon their territory, mountain gorillas have had to move farther up into the mountains for longer periods of time, meaning that they are often exposed to dangerous conditions. Mountain gorillas live in families that range in size from 2 to 35 members, but most often consist of approximately 12 members. Each family is led by a silverback, who gets his name from the silver hair on his back and hips. Silverbacks are by far the largest member of the family and weigh between 300 and 500 pounds, with the eastern lowland gorilla being the largest. Mountain gorillas on average weigh about 350 pounds and can be up to 15 times as strong as a human. All gorillas are herbivores and eat as many as 100 different types of fruit, but they also occasionally eat small insects, such as termites. Female mountain gorillas typically give birth for the first time between the ages of 10 and 12. Gestation is approximately the same for mountain gorillas as humans, about 8.5 to 9 months. Babies are nursed for about 3 years. Gorilla babies learn at a faster rate than their human counterparts. For example, gorilla babies crawl at about 2 months, while human babies take 6 months just to sit up. Gorilla babies can walk before they are 9 months, a feat that only the quickest of human babies are able to master. Gorilla babies are also learned to grasp their mother's fur, to ride on their backs at the age of 4 months, and seem to have a blast doing it. If you are lucky enough to trek to see mountain gorillas in the wild, it doesn't take long to fall in love with them. Looking into their dark brown eyes, you'll recognize a kindred spirit, a cousin. You'll find yourself falling in love with them. That's a good thing, because what we love, we protect. Perhaps no one has loved mountain gorillas more than the American scientist Dian Fossey. She almost single-handedly saved mountain gorillas from extinction. When Fossey was conducting her studies at Karasoke in Volcanoes National Park, the total mountain gorilla population had dropped to just 250 individuals. Mountain gorillas were well on their way to extinction. Fossey became a fierce and relentless advocate for the mountain gorillas and used every tool at her disposal to pull them back from the brink. Today, mountain gorillas are one of the true conservation success stories, with their population having risen to just over 1,000 individuals, over half of which live in Rwanda. Dian Fossey was born on January 16, 1932, in San Francisco, California. While working as an occupational therapist, she took out a loan, as I myself did, to make her first trip to Africa in 1963. She was fortunate enough to meet up with famed wildlife photographers Alan and Joan Root, who were filming a documentary about mountain gorillas in Rwanda. The Roots invited Fossey to camp with them and took her to see the mountain gorillas for the first time. It was love at first sight. In Gorillas in the Midst, Fossey described her first encounter with gorillas. When they heard the high-pitched screams and chest beats of the silverback, Alan and Joan Root motioned for her to remain still. They waited for the chest beats and screams to end. Then the three crept forward to about 50 feet from the group. Fossey wrote, "Peeking through the vegetation, we could distinguish an equally curious phalanx of black leather-countenanced, furry-headed primates peering back at us. Their bright eyes darted nervously from under heavy brows, as though trying to identify us as familiar friends or possible foes." As Alan set up his movie camera, the gorillas became curious, with several members climbing trees to look at them more clearly. Fossey was taken by their individuality, combined with the shyness of their behavior, that remained the most captivating impression of this first encounter with the greatest of the great apes. Then and there, she determined that somehow she would return to learn more about the mountain gorillas. Reluctantly, Fossey returned home to the United States, but Africa was already in her blood. In 1966, she attended a lecture given by the anthropologist Louis Leakey in Louisville, Kentucky. Fossey had briefly met Louis and his wife Mary Leakey when she had visited their excavation site at Odavi Gorge in Tanzania during Fossey's trip to Tanzania. During that trip, Leakey had explained to her that he was eager to launch long-term scientific studies of our three great ape cousins, chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans, believing that these studies of our closest animal relatives would reveal much about the evolution of man. Leakey had already recruited Jane Goodall to study the chimpanzees at Tanzania's Gombe National Park in 1960, but he had not yet found suitable recruits or raised the necessary funding to begin studies of the gorillas or orangutans. Fossey had an advantage, though. She was the right gender. Leakey believed women were more suited to studying the great apes than men because he considered them to be more patient and empathetic. Dr. Leakey vaguely remembered Fossey and was impressed with the article that she had published about gorillas after she had returned from Africa. After a brief interview, Dr. Leakey told Fossey she just might be the gorilla girl that he was looking for. However, he told her that if she was serious about going to Africa, she would have to have her appendix removed first, as she wouldn't want it to rupture while she was in the remote Virunga Mountains of Central Africa. Fossey immediately convinced a surgeon to give her an appendectomy. About 6 weeks after the surgery, she received a letter from Dr. Leakey that began, "Actually, there really isn't any dire need for you to have your appendix removed. That is only my way of testing applicants' determination." Dian Fossey was nothing if not determined. It was, however, a rather rude introduction to Leakey's peculiarities. Leakey soon raised the funds to send Fossey to Africa to begin the study. She initially began her study in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, then Zaire, until civil war first forced her to relocate to the Rwandan side of the Virunga Mountains. Fossey used nose prints to identify individuals within the gorilla families. She found that each member, like humans, had their own personalities. She studied gorilla vocalizations and mapped out ethnographic hierarchies of gorilla groups. Taking a cue from Jane Goodall, Fossey mimicked the behavior of the gorillas, which enabled her to be accepted by them. Thus, she was able to observe intimate behaviors within the gorilla families, such as mother-child relations and gorilla mourning. While Fossey's love for the mountain gorillas seems to have been love at first sight, it took her a bit longer to warm up to National Geographic photographer Bob Campbell. When National Geographic, a major contributor to Fossey's research, sent Campbell to Karasok in 1968, Fossey was, at first, rather put off by him. She viewed Campbell's presence as an intrusion to her work and rejected his desire to habituate the gorillas to human presence so that he could take photographs of them for publication. However, Fossey did trust Campbell enough to let him watch over her camp while she was gone for 2 months. When he returned a year later to take photographs for what was to be the 1970 National Geographic cover story on Fossey, the two became intimate. Fossey fell in love with the married photographer and hoped he would divorce his wife to stay with her. Their love affair continued until 1972, when Fossey received a letter from a mutual friend who told her that Campbell had made it clear that he would soon be leaving Karasok for good. Fossey felt like she was going to have a nervous breakdown and wrote in her journal, "Never have I known such sorrow." When Fossey confronted Campbell about his planned departure, he told her he loved her but would not be leaving his wife for her. When Campbell left Karasok for the last time on May 29, 1972, Fosse turned to alcohol to medicate her depression. As always, it was the gorillas themselves who lifted her spirits. No gorilla was better at lifting Fosse's spirits than a 10-year-old blackback named Digit. Fosse wrote that Digit really seemed to look forward to their daily contacts as a source of entertainment. He often invited play by flopping over onto his back, waving stumpy legs in the air, and looking at me smilingly as if to say, "How can you resist me?" At such times, I fear my scientific detachment dissolved. On one occasion, Fosse was observing the gorillas when she felt an arm around her shoulders and looked up into Digit's warm, gentle brown eyes. He gazed back down at her and began patting her head before settling by her side. She laid her head on his lap, which provided her warmth. Fosse's relationship with Digit was captured in National Geographic by Campbell's photographs, including one in which Digit was examining the camera itself. The heartbreak that Fosse experienced with the end of her love affair with Campbell was nothing compared to the despair she experienced when her beloved Digit, then 10 years old, was found butchered by an assistant on January 1st, 1978. Digit's head, heart, hands, and feet had all been removed. A dead dog belonging to the infamous poacher Manarukiko was also found at the site. Digit had likely killed the dog the poachers had used to track him down before Digit himself was speared to death and mutilated. Fosse turned her grief into action. It was clear that the gorillas she loved were under incredible threat. Corrupt game wardens, poachers from zoos, hunters with snares, and farmers encroaching upon the park were all driving her beloved gorillas to extinction. Remember, there were only an estimated 250 mountain gorillas left at that time. Following Digit's death, Fosse's research took a back seat to her active conservation as she launched a one-woman crusade to save her mountain gorillas. She launched the Digit Fund, now called the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund, to raise much-needed dollars for gorilla conservation. Fosse and the Rwandans she employed began spending more time in the field trying to locate and remove snares, which hunters primarily used for small game, but were undiscerning as to what they caught, than research. After all, what good was her research findings if the gorillas she studied were driven to extinction? Fosse began publicizing the gorillas' plight to gain worldwide attention to her conservation efforts. Her book, Gorillas in the Midst, became an international bestseller and raised much-needed funds to continue her conservation efforts. A handwritten postcard Fosse wrote to a supporter of her Karasok Research Center in 1984 describes her work. A summary of the 1984 work accomplished by the Digit Fund. We cut down 2,264 traps and 9,398 man-hours on patrol, and none of the gorillas under our monitorship were harmed by poachers, thanks to the interest and support of people such as yourself. 5 infants were born in 1984. Their futures seem much more hopeful, but our work must continue. In her war against the poachers, Fosse used every tool available to her. Rwandans can be rather superstitious. When Fosse learned that many of the locals had come to suspect her of being a witch, living as she did on the mountain with the gorillas, she embraced their fear and she used it to her advantage. Fosse would leave witchcraft markings on trees in the forest, and at times she even danced by the campfire by her Karasok Research Center wearing a witch's mask. Her strategies, while admittingly unorthodox, were successful, and many of the poachers kept well away from her. The toughness of Dian Fosse's assignment cannot be overemphasized. Not only was she at war with the men trying to murder her guerrillas, but she also had to endure the inhospitable conditions of the Virunga Mountains. The high altitude, the damp climate, and cold made her advanced emphysema worse. The Karasok Research Center was at 10,000 feet, and Fossey regularly had to climb higher than that to find the guerrillas, who were always on the move. Towards the end, Fossey had to take an oxygen tank with her. The loneliness Fossey endured was lessened, though, by the constant flow of student interns who came through Karasok. Fossey found some to be a terrific help, while others were more of a hindrance. Some of the research students who stood out included Ian Redman, Amy Vedder, Bill Weber, Sandy Harcourt, Kelly Stewart, the unassuming daughter of legendary actor Jimmy Stewart, and John Fowler. Many of them have continued to work with mountain gorillas and or with other environmental causes since their time at Karasok. Not surprisingly, Fossey's active conservation made dangerous enemies. Here she was, one formidable woman, fighting poachers, corrupt local government officials, and farmers, all to save a species that locals feared. Sometime during the night of December 26, 1985, Dian Fossey was murdered in her cabin's bedroom. Fossey characteristically put up a fight, and she even laid hands upon her pistol and a clip of ammunition, but the bullets were the wrong caliber and they didn't fit her weapon. Her killer used the panga, a large machete Fossey had confiscated from a poacher years ago and had hung on her living room wall. Fossey was struck several times on the top and the back of her head. The killer left the cabin ransacked, but nothing was found to be missing. Even Fossey's money and traveler's checks, more than $3,000 worth, her jewelry, and her expensive cameras were all untouched. The only thing missing from her cabin, according to Rwandan authorities, was a manuscript that she was preparing as a sequel to Gorillas in the Mist. The Rwandan authorities believed her murder was an inside job. Whites were seldom murdered by black Rwandans. Their investigation led to two individuals, Emmanuel Relikana, who had worked at Karasok but had been fired by Fossey several months earlier, and an American intern, Wayne McGuire, who had been staying at the research center. 9 months after Fossey's death, on August 21, 1986, both men were charged with her murder. Emmanuel Relikana was arrested and put into solitary confinement. He supposedly hung himself in his prison cell a few weeks later, never admitting any knowledge to the crime. Wayne McGuire was able to convince American embassy officials in Kigali of his innocence. He fled Rwanda just 2 weeks before the charges were made public with the United States government's assistance. Rwanda had no extradition treaty with the United States. Nonetheless, McGuire was tried in absentia by a Rwandan tribunal, and on December 11, 1986, just 10 days before the anniversary of Fossey's death, he was found guilty of her murder and sentenced to death by a firing squad. However, unless McGuire was stupid enough to return to Rwanda, there was no chance the verdict would ever be administered, since the United States had no extradition treaty with Rwanda. Farley Mowat, the great Canadian environmentalist and author, wrote the definitive biography of Dian Fossey, entitled Woman in the Mists, also titled Virunga in some editions, using Fossey's personal diaries, which her family gave Mowat access to. Mowat believed that Fossey was murdered by an African with whom she was familiar with, and who was familiar with the camp. Mowat believed the killer was hired by influential people who wanted to exploit Volcanoes National Park and its gorillas. Possibly, but Fossey's visa had been extended for 2 additional years just prior to her death, so it seems unlikely her murderers could have been so closely connected with the government. I wrote to Farley Mowat in 1994 and told him about my own trip to Kigali, Rwanda in 1991 and how I was detained by Rwandan soldiers for having taken a picture of the presidential palace. My harrowing capture is described in part 1 of this 3-part guerrilla miniseries. In his warm response to my letter, Mowat wrote on July 17, 1994, "I was fascinated by all eventful peregrinations into Rwanda. I must tell you a secret. When writing Virunga, Woman in the Mist is the U.S. title, I had a hunch that I should stay the hell out of the place and let Diane tell me about it. How right I was. What a disaster it is now." Mowat was referring, of course, to the horrific Rwandan genocide that was occurring then. After he secured my release from the Rwandan soldiers in 1991, I asked the American diplomat Larry Rector, who saved my life, if he had ever met Dian Fossey, and whether he had any theories as to who may have murdered her 6 years prior to my visit. "Two of the folks I work with knew her quite well," Rector said. "From what they tell me, who didn't want to kill her? I guess you'd have to be slightly mad to devote your life to studying the guerrillas." Rector surmised that it wasn't a poacher at all that killed Fossey, but an expat. The only expat staying at Karasoke at the time was Wayne McGuire, who was initially charged with the murder but escaped. Rector said the Rwandan government didn't pursue him because extraditing people was such a hassle. In 1992, I met Bob Campbell, the National Geographic photographer who chronicled Fossey's work with the guerrillas and later became her lover. Campbell was giving a photographic lecture of his work in Denver, Colorado. Afterwards, I spoke with him about my journey to Africa, and I asked him who he thought killed Fossey. His theory was that the director of Volcanoes National Park, who had been intimately involved in guerrilla poaching, murdered Fossey because her conservation work had threatened his poaching operation. Campbell said shortly afterwards the park director had contracted AIDS, which had ravaged so many Africans, and died. Campbell was pleased that the national park director got what he deserved. The graduate student accused of Fossey's murder, Wayne McGuire, suggested in an interview with the Oklahoman in 2005 that Protais Zigiranyirazo, who served as the governor of Ruangari province between 1974 and 1989, where Volcanoes National Park is located, may have ordered Dian Fossey's murder. Zigiranyirazo was the brother of the wife of the late president Juvenal Habyarimana, whose own assassination on April 6, 1994, was a spark that inflamed the Rwandan genocide. Zigiranyirazo would later serve 6 years in prison for war crimes before being acquitted. He was accused of having created the death squads responsible for killing 800,000 during the 1994 Rwandan genocide. "They put me up as a sacrificial lamb," McGuire said. However, American diplomat Larry Rector's suggestion that an expatriate may have committed Dian Fossey's murder deserves another look. The Rwandan tribunal that convicted Wayne McGuire of her murder believed that he was trying to gain access to her research to make a name for himself. While he has always denied having anything to do with Fossey's murder, McGuire has long suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and depression, by his own admission. In 2005, the state of Nebraska withdrew a job offer McGuire had been given with the Behavioral Health Office of Consumer Affairs, presumably because they learned of his conviction. McGuire has always maintained his innocence and has said the accusation that he was Fossey's murderer has ruined his life. "I have always been a prisoner of this ridiculous charge. I keep telling myself this is where it changes. But my worst fear is that on my deathbed someone will stick a camera in my face and ask, 'Did you kill Dian Fossey?' In the years since Fosse's death, environmental conservation has become even more dangerous work for both environmental activists and national park rangers. Like Fosse, conservationists are often up against powerful business interests, corrupt government officials, and well-armed poachers. Every year, well over 100 conservationists are murdered, according to Global Witness. The number of conservationists murdered every year are staggering. 2024, 146. 2023, 196. 2022, 175. 2021, 200. And 2020, 225. It is just as dangerous to be a national park ranger. Over a 16-year period, 2006 to 2021, a total of 2,351 on-duty ranger fatalities were recorded. Half of these ranger deaths were homicides, with the remainder being caused by accidents, illness, or animal attacks. The most dangerous park in the world to be a ranger is Virunga National Park in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, home to the mountain gorillas discussed here. In the past decade, 150 rangers were killed in attacks, primarily led by the FDLR forces, the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, the Hutu rebel group, and by the Mai Mai, a range of militia groups formed in the Congo's wars since 1996. On one day, in April 2020, 12 park rangers and 4 tourists were killed by the Rwandan Hutus. Another 6 rangers were killed and several others injured in an ambush in January 2021. In May 2023, armed members of the Mai Mai killed 6 rangers and 1 civilian employee. Virunga National Park in the Congo has been called the most dangerous place to be a national park ranger for good reason. The brilliant 2014 documentary Virunga follows the rangers' dangerous work to protect endangered mountain gorillas from poachers, armed rebels, and oil drilling, and is must-viewing. Thanks to Fosse's sacrifice and the work of the research students that assisted her, mountain gorillas were brought back from the brink, one of the real success stories in conservation. From a population of 250 in the mid-1970s, mountain gorillas are now estimated to number a little over 1,000, with approximately 604 in the 3 Virunga national parks of Rwanda, Uganda, and the Congo, and 459 in the impenetrable forest of Uganda. However, because they are only endemic to these 2 parks, their survival is by no means guaranteed. Unfortunately, the region they live in remains volatile, with the Congo seemingly in perpetual civil unrest. Perhaps the greatest threat to mountain gorillas is now foreign business interests who want to mine coltan used in cell phones and the gorilla habitats, as well as oil exploration. The Rwandan, Ugandan, and Democratic Republic of the Congo governments need to resist these foreign interests. During her lifetime, Dian Fossey rejected the idea of habituating the mountain gorillas for tourism. However, it is precisely that tourism which provides the best hope for the mountain gorillas' survival. Tourist dollars have become a major part of the Rwandan and Ugandan economies and would become a larger part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo's economy if the country was more secure for tourists. Tourism has benefited local communities and built new schools and medical clinics. Locals now see the worth of the gorillas and, as a result, want to protect them. In 1977, Dian Fossey visited Koko, the western lowland gorilla who learned over 1,000 American Sign Language words and understood over 2,000 spoken words. Jane Goodall visited Koko the following year. Koko was impressed with Fosse's range of gorilla vocalizations. Koko was born at the San Francisco Zoo on July 4, 1971. Francine Penny Patterson, a Ph.D. candidate at Stanford University, began teaching Coco when she was just 1 year old. The National Geographic Society began funding Patterson and her study of linguistic behavior and higher cognitive functioning in the gorilla in 1976. Coco understood nouns, verbs, and adjectives, including abstract concepts such as good and false. She scored between 70 and 90 on various IQ scales, and some experts, including Mary Lee Ginsvold, director of the Chimpanzee and Human Communication Institute, wrote that Coco used language in the same way as people. In addition to her amazing sign language skills, Coco taught us about empathy. In 1983, Coco became fascinated by the tiny tree frogs that lived in her yard. She captured one and delicately cradled it under her arm, protecting it from her male gorilla companion, Michael. After carrying it around for a while, she placed it on some rocks in her yard under a tub to further shield it from possible rough play. The Gorilla Foundation wrote of the incident, "It is an outstanding example of Coco's innate gentleness and nurturing spirit toward small, vulnerable creatures and her regard for other species." Coco's gentle treatment of the tree frogs foretold her companionship with kittens. She was given her first kitten in 1985 and named her All Ball. Coco had been asking for a kitten for some time. The two quickly became inseparable. Their friendship became the subject of a best-selling children's book, Coco's Kitten. When All Ball was released out of Coco's enclosure and accidentally hit by a car, Coco was deeply saddened and cried and whimpered, as well as signed, "Sad, frown, and cry." Coco was given additional kittens, who she quickly befriended. In 2004, Coco used her signs to express that she had a toothache and used a pain chart to convey its severity. Coco requested to see a doctor and was then given an exam by a team of doctors from Stanford. Coco reports that she has a toothache, uses a pain chart to convey the severity of the problem, and requested a doctor. During her lifetime, Coco received a lot of famous visitors, including Betty White, William Shatner, Leonardo DiCaprio, Sting, Mr. Rogers, and Robin Williams. Robin Williams said that visiting Coco was an unforgettable experience and was one of the highlights of his life. When asked whether she was a gorilla or a person, Coco would often sign, "Fine gorilla person." Indeed, Coco was both. Through her interspecies communication, Coco taught humanity much about the intelligence of animals and their empathy for others. Sadly, Coco died in her sleep at the age of 46 on June 19, 2018, at the Gorilla Foundation's preserve in the Santa Cruz Mountains of California. Upon learning of Coco's death, Dr. Jane Goodall penned a moving tribute to her, ending it with these words, "Coco, you taught us much about the gorilla intellect, and you are much loved. You will be missed." Like Coco, we are people, but we are also animals. Looking at gorillas, we are reminded that we are not so different. Animals are with us all of the time. They are a part of our consciousness, whether we are aware of it or not. Indigenous people the world over believe that animals have spirits which teach us and guide us if we allow ourselves to listen to them. In each of the Our Wild World podcasts, I will briefly touch on what Indigenous people believe the animal spirit represents for humans. In his book Animal Spirit Guides, Dr. Stephen D. Farmer wrote that gorillas teach us how important communication is. It's not hard to believe, considering Coco's mastery of American Sign Language. We need to focus less on how much we have to say and more on what it is we say. Listening to others is critical. Silverbacks teach us to respect ourselves as well as everyone we encounter. We can meditate and call on the mountain gorilla when we need to be strong, protective, and caring of others. Gorillas teach us that we should be compassionate and gentle with others, but that we also need to aggressively protect the weaker among us when they are threatened by others. The mountain gorilla calls upon us to be loyal and protective of our families, to be proud of them, though not arrogant. In part 3 of this trilogy, Gorillas in Our Midst from Our Wild World, I will discuss more about gorilla behavior and family social structure. I will also share the treks my wife and I have made to see the mountain gorillas at Volcanoes National Park, Rwanda, and our trek to see them at the Bwindi Impenetrable Forest in Uganda. If you are so moved and would like to make a donation to help support gorillas, I strongly encourage you donating to the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund. This concludes our episode. Please be sure to check out our sister Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, or X pages for accompanying pictures my wife and I have taken in Africa. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like it, follow it, and leave us a review. Be sure to tell your friends. New episodes are released every 3 weeks on Tuesdays. Please join me again for Our Wild World. You can contact me anytime at ourwildworldshow@gmail.com. I am also available to give talks on many of the animals featured in this series. You can download a flyer with my available talks on any of our websites. The talks are free as long as they are within a 1-hour radius of Rockford, Illinois. I do suggest a minimum donation of at least $50 to a wildlife charity for each talk. Thank you for listening. And remember, every breath you take connects you with every other living being on this planet. You are a part of nature. Love it, protect it, and nature will never disappoint you, strengthening and healing you in return.